Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Ute, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Thank you very much, and good morning to you.
I'm so delighted to have you on the podcast and the work that you do. I'm very interested in hearing all about it. And specifically on this podcast, we talk a lot about helping people through conflict at work. Yeah. So how some of the principles and what you see can help people who find themselves in difficult situations. But before we get there, I would like to hear about the first job you ever had as a young person.
The first job I ever had was probably in my father's takeaway. I was at the wow age of 13. I went to an all-girls school, which sounds much posher than it was, but I went to an all-girls school. And they all, at this time, jumpsuits were in. I mean, it's just come back, right? And everyone wore this jumpsuit, this one particular jumpsuit from one particular shop in Augsburg, which is in Bavaria, which is a part of Germany where I grew up. Anyway, the thing was 99 Deutschmark. And I went to my parents very confident saying, I need this jumpsuit. And my parents very confidently turned around and they said, well, need is not an option. And I was disturbed because everyone wore it. Right? Okay, the Germans, compared to the English, I live in London now, the English wear uniforms. We don't do this in Germany, right? This is a Second World War change, of course, right? We used to do this before the war. Anyway, but my dad said, what you can do is you can work. So every Saturday, I had to walk into the hot dog takeaway stand in front of Woolworth, and I sold hot dogs for the whole day. After 4 or 5 weeks, I can't remember, it might have been 2 months, I had the 99 pounds, Deutschmark. I was still 9 Deutschmark short because I wanted the belt, because everyone had the belt too. I believe my parents bought me the belt. So that was my first job ever.
So all of that work for the jumpsuit, was it worth it?
Absolutely. The only thing I regret is I have grown out of it.
So where did you go after the hot dog stand?
I am full-blown neurodivergent, and I only say this not in order to be mainstream, but it had a huge impact on my life because I was very early sorted out of the capability of having a higher education. So I was in Germany, I was streamlined into what we call, middle education. So I was not allowed to study, basically. So my first proper job, I trained in hotel management. I lived and worked hotel management for 10 years. I worked in South Africa. I had a tiny little stint in Texas. I worked in Spain. I worked in Britain. Of course, worked in Germany. Then hotel industry became very tick boxy, right? This is how you have to greet a customer, or this is how you have to, and I'm not a tick boxy person, right? I write manuals, I don't adhere to them. That's what I say. I know it's very naughty. Then I left the hotel industry and I found a company, and they had an ad in the newspaper. They said, do you speak English? And by then I had lived in South Africa, I lived in England, and my English was okay. Even though my English teacher said to me once, Ute, there are people who are able to learn the language, and there are people who are not. You do not belong to the first group. So I do apologize for all the English tongues out there. I am going to, you have to work with my English now.
Your English is beautiful.
So my second career was then a profound change. I changed into education, but I had a startup together with a company, Helen Duron Early English, and they were specialized in providing material and some sort of training to teach English to children as if it would be their second mother tongue. So no translation. So the youngest kids I taught were 9 months old. And we followed through until 17 when they could do Cambridge certificates. So this meant I had to deconceptualize. Bear in mind, I had not studied, right? I have not had any education in sense of pedagogy or teacher training or anything. So all I did then for 12 years was reading, 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 because how do you show without translating to a 4-year-old the difference between two, two, and two?
Mm.
So I started to create a huge amount of games which took language apart. And what happened in these 10 or 12 years, I then became a trainer. I trained internationally across the world. I became a keynote for the company around how to manage classrooms so that they run really smoothly, how to manage learning centers. I started with 4 children. When I sold the business, I had over 800 kids. I had 3
Mm.
learning centers, 24 members of staff. It was a incredibly developmental, rewarding, and difficult time, right? I got really interested in why do children not develop the way I thought they would. And that led me to go actually to the UK. At that time, my now ex-husband, he still is English, but that was one of the reasons why I moved to England. I did a leap year, a gap year, and did a master's in creative writing at Oxford Brookes. Then I did a bachelor in psychology. Then I did another master's in clinical psychology, which I had to stop because I had a cancer diagnosis and I looked after the cancer then. 4 weeks after the last surgery, I left the UK to volunteer in Sri Lanka for 3 months for the National Institute for Mental Health. I came back and I did a college degree in counselling, and then I did a doctorate in psychology.
Wow, what a long and winding road. And so interesting that you start off with being sorted out as not an academic person,
Yeah,
being told you're don't try to learn another language, don't try to learn English.
yeah.
Those are really tough messages, in particular as a young person. How how did you push past that? Did it roll off you? What was your reaction to being told that by authority figures?
I think it in a sense it destroyed me.
Mhm.
In another sense, I also realized there's something in me which is quite fierce,
Mm.
and so it didn't destroy me to that point that I gave up. But it took me a while to understand how, not who, and that's something which I really want to stress later on, if I may, how I want to be in this world. The the thing that happens very often, and for me, allow me to link this immediately deeply to conflict. What happens very often is when we say to somebody something, it is very often a comment, a feedback, a critique of behavior.
Mhm.
Yeah. So when a child doesn't do the room right because it looks like a mess, then the idea is, if you clean up your room, you are a good girl or you're a good boy. So what we are now doing is we're conflating the behavior of a person with the actual being of that human.
Mhm.
And I realized this when I had my educational institute. And what I realized at this time is I'm not going to do this with the kids who are in my learning centers. So the whole company, my whole company, run on 4 rules. And the first rule was we can always critique behavior, fingers off the person.
Mm.
And this is something which I think I only learned in a way which has become an inherent, can I say, ethical quality of mine.
Mhm.
That I've lectured now for 6 years, just recently left the lecturing position. So I worked with students, different nationalities, different age group, incredibly, incredibly beautiful time. So, and of course, what do you do as a lecturer? You give grades, right?
Mhm.
I made always sure to say that piece of writing, and then I can say was not up to standard. Never your work, you. Because I'm not critiquing the person, but I'm critiquing the work that has been produced.
Yes. I find that is so incredibly personally freeing. Um,
Mm.
but the path forward with conflict, because so many times in conflict, when somebody is repeatedly causing us pain, we give the story, they're a bad person, they are out to get me, they. And what am I supposed to do with that? If I've got a colleague who is irrational, I've got a colleague who only cares about themselves, what am I going to do about that? It's very disempowering. Instead of getting specific, okay, well, what is the specific? If I think this person's disrespectful and that's
Yeah.
who they are, okay, well, then I need them to go away. But if I can understand, what do I find disrespectful? What is the specific behavior? All of a
Yeah.
sudden, behaviors can be talked about.
Correct.
We can have conversations, we can have dialogue. I can learn to understand what you're doing. We can see what can be shifted, what's my standard, what's the company's. There's all of this freedom and
Yeah.
creativity and a kind of collaboration when I actually am looking at the thing that I really want to change, which is the behavior.
Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
it's freedom and it's a pivot and I think it's wonderful to have that realization.
Yeah. And for me, it's a lot more peaceful,
Hmm.
right? And when I every time I go into a workshop, or when I give a talk, or when I lecture, I give people a bit of a wow. This is what you got. This is the roller coaster you've signed up for. I'm very direct. I have a wonderful feedback from a patient, really a patient, who said she doesn't take any prisoners, and it's a boot camp, which I think is really clear because I am direct, right? I'm not beating about the bush. It's just not me. If this is not what you want, perfect. But then we can't work together. And it's a beautiful realization that we can't work together.
Hmm.
My being is not under threat when you say the directness, that's behavior, doesn't work for me,
Hmm.
right? And the moment I offer that to you, the moment you can say, this behavior doesn't work for me, Ute, then it's okay, it's this behavior. It's got nothing to do with, well, it's not true, nothing, of course, it was polemic, but it keeps me as a person intact.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned that you want to talk about the difference between how versus who.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit
Um,
about that?
mhm. So, being a psychologist, often, of course, people come and say, I don't know who I am. And I think we in the Western world, we have this idea of the the self, yeah, the I. And of
Hmm.
course, I mean, it's very much coined from good old Father Freud and all of that. How is the I created? Actually, Freud never spoke of the ego, right? He spoke about the I, but it was never translated correctly because
Mm.
his publisher thought I doesn't sound sexy enough for a book. And ego means something totally different. So I'm still very confused years after the guy has died. But this understanding of who am I is for me so absurd because we are consistently in flux. We are
Yeah.
changing all the time, right? The vessel in which we are living, our body consistently changes. Our knowledge changes. Our ability to feel changes. Our resilience changes. Everything changes. And then you're going to ask me who you are? So for me, what my work has taken me is, would you allow me to say it quite polemically, just maybe to wake up everyone? I don't care who you are. What I care about is how you are living your life in this world, in this moment. Because it's the how that interacts with the other person,
Mm.
not necessarily the who.
I love that because I noticed that you are interested in existentialism, and I'm
Yeah,
definitely a bit of an existentialist. And as Pascal says, the only time we have is the present,
yeah,
right? The future does not exist. It is not there. The past is gone and never to be revisited again. And so the
yeah,
only time we have is the time right now. And yet so many times we either bemoan the past, the awful things or the wonderful things that we don't have access to,
yeah,
and or we are working, working, working for this imagined future that may or may not come. And
Yeah.
then we don't live the only thing that we have, which is the present.
Yeah.
And I also think it's very freeing to not be obsessed with who am I, because I also agree it doesn't exist. It's this sort of one idea of identity is that we're the peach and the pet, right? That the fleshy part is the body and the pit is my essential self. And I need to figure out what my essential self is.
Yeah.
Other, but as you said, we're also always in change. And so the moment I understand who I am, I have now shifted because now I
Correct.
have a new piece of information. And so leaving that behind, but so many people get caught up, I don't know who I am,
Yeah.
as if it's stable and doesn't change.
Yeah.
It can be unsettling to, I think,
Correct.
realize that there isn't this fixed self, but also then very freeing because the good life is the active life.
Yeah.
And we are works in progress, which mean I
Yeah.
don't have to be stuck in whatever behavior that is. And I think this is very freeing when it comes to conflict. So if you have one particular style or one pattern, it can shift. It can
Yeah.
change. You can do something different. You can rewrite your narrative. You can develop new skills. If you are unhappy, you can do something different. If you are happy with what's going on, you can do more of that and grow in that. So I think that's a wonderful message that people don't hear very often, that the search for the fixed self is is not going to happen because there is no such phantom.
Yeah. It's also, I think, I find it a bit head scratching. I mean, when you look into these kitchen psychologists, I'm sorry, I call people kitchen psychologists who have read maybe, half a book in psychology and now they have all the meaning in the world. Um, just want to be very clear. I don't have the knowledge, right? It's not what I'm claiming here, but I'm very critical towards those who do claim. So when kitchen psychologists say, you are okay the way you are, comma, but I want you to be like that. So what we are telling people is, on the one side, you are worth and you are perfect the way you are, but actually I would like you to develop. That's nonsense,
Yeah.
right? Where I come from is I often give people there's this it's kind of a sentiment. It's something I have thought about. Let me just say it, and you tell me what you think. I ask people to be grateful for the person they were,
Mhm.
to be respectful to the person they are, and to be quite excited about the person they will be.
Mm. Oh, I love that.
Right? There is no need for anything. We are not here. We would not be here if we wouldn't have had the past.
Mhm.
So let's respect that,
Mhm.
right? Let's be very mindful about who we are now. Yeah. And this is the who that holds the shift. So how we
Mhm.
are presenting to the
Mhm.
world in the here and now by being open and of course cognizant of that tomorrow there is a different me.
Mm. I love that.
Hmm?
I'm a big believer in developing habits.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, I'm a virtue ethicist. I taught philosophy for a very long time, and that very much resonates with me, this habit forming. And the wonderful thing about virtue and
Mm.
developing who you are is that it is a development. You don't reach it and then you live it out. It's a continued choice. But the
Mm.
more you make a choice, you're more likely to make that choice, right? That habit of, developing courage. You don't get it because you say you want it. You get it because you do it in the everyday. But it is an everyday choice to face
Yeah.
whatever fear that is, to decide what you're going to do, to decide who you want to be now. But as you're deciding who you are today, you are deciding or laying the groundwork for the choices in the future.
Right.
How do you help move people into that space? Let's suppose somebody wants to develop courage. I find in workplaces when it comes to conflict and having whatever I think is a difficult conversation, if I'm not having it, it's because typically there's some kind of fear.
Yeah.
That's not everything, but there's some kind of fear. So if I feel that about this conversation I want to have, but I don't know how to have it, how would you encourage somebody to develop that virtue of courage to be able to have those fruitful, difficult conversations?
I think the first step for me always is to understand what the other person means with courage.
Mm.
Because I think there is this belief out there that courage feels good. It's good. It feels good, right? We have this Braveheart picture that we are running into war, feeling good. And anyone who has used courage, they will know it's not a good feeling. It's not easy. And when we come to a point that we realize is actually something that's quite uncomfortable,
Mhm.
we often come to a point where we laugh because then we realize if it would be easy, we wouldn't need courage.
Right.
Bravery is not needed when you open a book you really want to read, right?
Right.
Bravery is needed to walk into a room and to say something that you need to say, but you fear saying it.
Yeah.
Courage and bravery are only there if the environment is perceived by your system as dangerous.
Hmm.
Then we need courage if we want to do something in the environment. And many of us avoid that, right?
Hmm.
That's when I hear so many people saying, I don't do conflict very well. Or I am not a conflict positive person. And the M is so exciting in this moment because the M means you have now created an identity of avoidance.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
When I ask people, so how often do you actively engage with conflict? And they say never. My question is, how do you know how good you are?
Mm.
Right? If you've never jumped on a bicycle, how do you know that you can or cannot cycle? So we need to understand what is courage. And then we need to start noticing how it is to feel courageous.
Mm.
Yeah. And it starts with little
Hmm.
things. Because what many people I think do is they bottle up for so long until that thing they should have. I'm using the word should here, forgive me, it's not my favorite word. And it is because it is a judgment, and I do judge here. I want to be very clear, very genuinely transparent. They should have spoken about maybe 6 months or 9 months or even a year ago. So now that thing has been festering. Resentment is probably there. A lot of things have gone on top. Your mind is now busy creating a narrative that evilizes the other person, probably in the other person also. So now the whole thing has gotten bigger and bigger. So now, when you are walking into the room, you're walking into a very different room, right?
Hmm.
And this is when people start to actually want to manage conflict. But this is too much,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
You not start to start learning jogging by doing a marathon.
Right.
I have not met anyone. I mean, maybe there are people out there, but I don't think the only person I know who did a marathon for the first time died because after it wasn't, I don't know, did they run into Athens and then say we won the war? It was Greek, right? And then toppled over and died because was so exhausted. That's not an option.
Right.
We need to start understanding, can I actually do a kilometer or a mile?
Hmm.
And how does the smile in conflict look like?
Hmm.
And I need to create a system. In psychology, we would call this exposure therapy.
Hmm.
We need to create a ladder-based system where I can create something for you that you have success.
Hmm.
So we create the first conflict you are going in on a level, if we say 10, totally disastrous, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
0, cool as a cucumber, no problem. I want it to be on a 3. And once you have done the three, what you've learned, your internal system, so the psychological feedback loop is coming into place. You're teaching the feedback loop. Oh, wow, look at me. I can do that. So now the next conflict, we're going to pop up to 5.
Yeah, I mean, that's beautifully said. I absolutely
Mm.
agree. And I love that you started with some people have this Braveheart picture of courage as, it's exciting and it's thrilling, and I don't feel that way. I feel fear, so
Yeah,
I'm not good at it. I feel like courage feels good in retrospect, right?
yeah,
When I have faced the fear and done it anyway, right? I have
yeah,
moved through it. I have done the hard thing. Then you get the reward. We want
right.
it the opposite. I want to feel the good and then
Yeah,
I will do the good. But this just is
yeah,
not how difficult things, if it's difficult for me, works. I go through it, I get the experience. And I absolutely agree with you. When I talk with people about conflict, they typically they think, oh, well, I'm not going to do that because they're thinking about this really awful, really hard, complicated situation.
yeah,
And I think, yeah, I wouldn't do not do that. Do not start there. Find a friend, find something, but have it be that. I love your system. I'm not a psychologist by trade, so I love the system of thinking about, okay, where is that level that I could imagine doing it? And
yeah,
I think do it with someone who is friendly, who will go with you, see how it feels.
yeah, yeah,
And I think, people are fearful of losing or it, a lot of times people are worried about damaging relationships. But even if you or not getting the outcome they want, but I think you're always going to get a good outcome because you did it. You're building trust in yourself. You're building resilience, and you only get it through doing it and then changing it. What worked, what didn't. But you
yeah,
only get that through experience. And if you
yeah,
don't experience, as you said, how can you know what to do, what
yeah,
not to do?
yeah. Can I pick out on two things here?
Please, yes,
So one is about um, you are getting something out of it. So I give you an example out of my life, if I may.
please.
So it's in a clinic I work, and there was an interaction which was about my diary with one of my clients, which was done by one of the people who work in the clinic. Um, and I was not happy with that interaction, and I voiced that. And it very quickly went into defense, and very quickly. So within, I would say, maybe 3 minutes, uh, that conflict was at a point of, okay, so I have to talk to your superior. So that's hierarchy. That's authoritarian. It's not authority. That's authoritarian.
Mhm.
The other person then so was then well, this is how the handbook is. So this is an impasse, right? So that's a perfect example of how I messed it up, right? Big time. Okay, so let's look. This is 4 weeks ago, just to be very clear here. Right? That's 4 weeks ago. So I walk out, and there is this thing in my belly, which is I don't know if I can say the S word here, but it's this OS feeling. And I have learned that something psychologists did really wrong big time is to coin some emotions as negative and some as positive. I think
Mm.
it's ridiculous and I think it's nonsense. We have emotions we like, and we have emotions that are difficult, right?
Mhm.
And fear, sadness, shame, guilt, anxiety, grief, anger, these are emotions we don't like, but they
Mhm.
have data. They are really important. So this
Mhm.
was an emotion I didn't like. And on my way home, I really tried to avoid it by blaming the other person, like we all do. But of course, I knew very well what I did. So when I arrived at home, I thought, yeah, that's not going to work for you, Ute, because, and here's an important part. I'm talking to myself now, I do this quite a lot. Um, you have reacted in a way which is not your ethic.
Mhm.
It's not how you want to walk this planet. And now I realized what I said was perfectly okay, and I stand by it. How I offered that was not. This is just not negotiable. That was wrong.
Mhm.
And that's when I sat down and I wrote an email. And that's exactly what I said. Interestingly, the person came back, and this was in the evening, so the person only read it the next day. The first sentence was, "I really appreciate what you said. Thank you."
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you
So,
for that example. I mean, and from your life, I love it when people who are professionals show that they're human, right? We're all human. Sometimes we
what human?
respond. So it's hard to be a human when we are people on the way and we want to develop and we think that action did not meet what I really believe, my ethic, my ethos,
Yeah,
who I want to be in the world, how I want to go about in the world. And what do we do? I think that we all have to realize that we are not angels and saints. We are human persons. We make
yeah,
mistakes. And so planning for making mistakes, because we've made them, you will make them. It's not if, it's when.
yeah,
How are you going to treat yourself? How are you
yeah,
going to make amends? And I love that you just said, I did something wrong, right? I mean, so many times we want to skirt around it because we don't typically see ourselves as the wrongdoer, even when we are. But that is a part of development. What did I do that was incommensurate with my values? What am I
yeah,
going to do now? How do I repair these relationships and move forward?
yeah.
I mean, it's a wonderful illustration of things that normally happen in our lives.
Yes. If 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 you look up what conflict actually means, if you go into the etiology of the word, it means nothing else but two people or two groups have different understandings around the same topic.
Mhm,
Let me just, I find this fascinating. When I looked up the word, is two people, allow me to go to people, take groups out for a moment, two people have a different understanding around the same topic. That means it's inevitable to have conflict.
mhm,
What we are doing wrong in our social discourse is we are using the word conflict for happenings which are not conflict but war. And there is a huge difference.
mhm,
War is not conflict any longer. We're talking about something different.
mhm,
So a lot of people, when they hear the word conflict, allow me to say that the Israel-Gaza conflict has been coined as a conflict for how many years?
mhm,
I would really hesitate to say this has been conflict,
mhm,
right? So, but when we are conflating these words,
mhm,
when somebody hears the word conflict in your linguistic system, so I'm not talking politics here, I just want to be very clear. In a linguistic system, when you hear the word conflict, what is linked now to conflict is war and death and devastation and pain and hurt.
mhm,
Of course, you don't want to do that. Any person with some soul and some heart doesn't want to do that.
mhm,
But that's not conflict, that's war.
mhm.
And we can go to war if we can't resolve conflicts. And that's the crazy thing about it. The avoidance of conflict, not necessarily, but has a very strong push, is a very strong driver to have something that is much more difficult and has very different implication. And that's what I call war. Does this make sense?
Absolutely. I really appreciate that because when people hear the word conflict, I talk about managed conflict, unmanaged conflict at work,
Yeah.
right? So we want conflict. We want a difference. How else are you going to get innovation? How else are we really going to meet the needs of our constituents? Because I'm fabulous. You're fabulous. But not everybody's like me, not everybody's like you. And we're going to have different ideas and opinions and backgrounds, and we should. And this is good. And we can harness this creativity, engagement. All of these wonderful things come out from the fact that we have conflicting ideas of how to move forward, how to use resources. This is a good, but I think you're absolutely right. When we conflate conflict with bad, the very fact that you have a different idea, whether it's how to use resources, political, religious, whatever, the very fact of the difference,
Yeah.
I'm now thinking it is like a war. It's me versus you. instead of how can we collaborate, where can we compromise, where can we merge to in dialogue to the third way. But I think you're very right. When we hear conflict, we hear conflict avoidant, we hear aggression, we hear bad instead of no, conflict is everywhere. Conflict is
Yeah.
not good or bad. It's difference. And it's how are we going to respond?
Yeah.
What are we going to do next? How can we disagree well? Right. And so we have whole courses and trainings on disagreeing well, the art of collaboration, the art of bringing in, having psychological safety. How are we going to recognize difference, embrace it, and not allow it to fester and build these narratives and this, that, and the other?
Yeah. Would you allow me to make a link to Buddhism here?
Please.
Um, so I've done a pre-course to the first course of Buddhist philosophy and the science of the mind, which was a 3-year course, which was the pre-course. So I'm not a Buddhist, I just want to be very clear, but I honor deeply the Buddhist understanding of the science of the mind. So it's the Mahayana tradition, which for you as an existentialist is so deeply interconnected to me with existential philosophy. Anyway, one of the things I was taught here was the first step for what the Buddhists call enlightenment, but for me as a non-Buddhist means being a little less ignorant, is to create doubt in my own mind towards my own mind. So if we recall what the definition of conflict is, the definition of conflict is two people having a different opinion around the same thing. Now, if I bring that link into what I just said, doubt is one person having different opinion around the same thing. So what we could say that doubt is a presentation of a conflict I'm having in myself. Mm-hmm. Now, conflict avoidance is something which has been, I don't know, facetiously brought into our life as something as the good life, this toxic happiness, that everything is positive, all of that stuff, which manifestation of the universe and hope of the jelly bear oracle. There is a book in Germany. Honestly, the Germans are really great with that stuff. Weird. All in order to not necessarily look at myself. But what I see with people, I'm coming back to the how and the who. How many people have a problem with themselves? Who am I? Because the doubt, the conflict I have with myself is not something I'm allowed to have. Because I shouldn't. Because the moment I have doubt with myself, with my own understanding and so on, I cannot categorize myself neatly any longer. And therefore, I have a problem with my individuality, or I have my problem with who I am. So I think we do not only have a problem with conflict in the social realm, in the interpersonal, but also in the intrapersonal realm. Because it's very enlightening to start to doubt your own thoughts. It's not easy.
No.
You need to be brave. But we've done all of that already in our conversation.
I think it's really interesting what you say. And I'm not sure if this is exactly along the same lines as you were talking about, but it reminded me of one path forward when I'm in conflict with somebody else is by the time I start to notice that I'm really bothered by somebody else's behavior, I haven't been paying attention, then I have started to spin a narrative. And if I can take a pause and doubt that narrative, why am I saying this about this other person? Why is this so important to me? How am I showing up versus me blaming them of how they're showing up? And so this sort of doubt of maybe there's something more. Maybe there's another reason. Maybe, right? So this kind of doubt, I think, helps us to humanize the other instead of turning them into the other, which is typically what we do in order to make them the dummy of they're the evil one and they're the problem and I'm not the problem, I'm the victim. course, I'm not talking about crimes, but in everyday work environments. And so um, this doubt that maybe there's more.
Yeah. I love I love where you go with that. And you say humanize the other. But the doubt also allows you to probably notice what's missing for you. Yeah. Because you might have gotten annoyed because the person didn't give you the respect you think you deserve.
Right.
And look, so this means there is a hurt, there is a
Right.
pain, there's a suffering. And we need to speak to that hurt. We need to speak to that pain. We need to speak to that suffering. And I'm not talking about, throwing a pity party. I mean, I love pity parties. Don't get me wrong. We all should have a pity party, but it needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it shouldn't be longer than 6, just to be clear. But we need to attend to these vulnerabilities and not just say, ooh, right? Because if I notice, wow, I was just dismissed like, everyone dismissed me when I grew up. I'm just using the child now because it's an easy way to do. It's not always like that. Of course,
Right.
it's not that simple either. You can actually start taking care of this hurt ego state that you may discover. And the moment you take care of this ego state is not reactive any longer,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're not under its control
Yes.
as you've been before. And that allows you, again, to be a lot less ignorant. And I don't mean ignorant in the negative sense,
Right.
I mean it as our natural stance towards the world. We are less ignorant and we can become more aligned with our values. This doesn't mean you become a doormat. I mean, trust
Mm-hmm.
me, as more I do conflict in a way that I say sincerely sorry, as less I'm a pushover.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. This wonderful freeing of I don't have to wait for the other person to change. I don't have to wait for the other person to start respecting me. And when I deal with why I'm responding this particular way, why this has been so impactful, I get to do all this work. And I have it's this wonderful way for me to bring my own temperature down so that I can now just have this more matter of fact conversation about civility standards at work or how we treat people in this family or in this community setting instead of all of these emotions that I'm giving to this other person. And so it's very hard for the other person to see what's happening, what's going on, what needs to be fixed because it's just so much. And the more I can see what's going on with me and look for and heal or notice or whatever needs to happen, then there's just a variety of ways in which we can solve issues, which I think is just wonderful news because many times we get tricked in thinking it's one way and it's you and you've got to change and you've got to say you're sorry. End of story. I'm stuck until you do that.
Yeah. And can I say the other way around?
Yeah.
There are people who say, it's always me. I'm always in the wrong. The other person is always right.
Mm.
And the moment we go into these universal binaries, I'm not saying binaries don't exist. I say the universality of binaries doesn't exist. The moment your mind offers you a narrative that seems to be the universal truth, ooh, put your
Mm.
suspicious hat on because it can't be right. Yeah.
Mm.
And what it's definitely not is what we call in third wave behavioralism psychological flexibility.
Mm.
So now you are vetted to be on autopilot, regardless of the situation. And the autopilot is like a broken clock. You're probably right twice a day.
I love that. Well, we don't have too much time left, but I would love to talk about your book that by the time this comes out, it will have been out for a week, and it's called A Minimalist Guide to Becoming Resilient, How
Yeah.
to Yield, Return, and Begin Again. And
Yeah.
another subtitle, A Book of German Precision, Emotional Healing, and Stress Management. Please tell
Yeah.
us about your book, what we can expect to find in it, and why you wrote it.
Um, so it's the first part of a series, and the books are all based on talks, workshops, and lectures I gave, and all the material comes together. And it's a very short book. I tell you why. It's a self-guide, right? It's a guide for people who want to develop a particular skill. And I want to be very clear, resilience is not given to us. It's a skill that we need to learn and earn.
Mm.
When I look at self-help books, I find them very long, very often.
Right.
And and I know, I've told you at the beginning, I've done a master's in creative writing, and you of course get to know the publishing industry a little bit, and they say, okay, self-help book, this is a genre, and you have to write, I don't know, 50,000 words. And I thought, bloody hell. All we know, I'm so sorry, I said bloody hell, and now I said it again. Anyway, I thought, we know from psychological research when we are stressed, our ability to hold a cognitive load is just going down. I mean, we all know that, right? I don't need research for that, but research gives me the evidence to say this here on the podcast. So why don't we write it very short? I think George Bernard Shaw said, I'm sorry that I wrote you a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one.
Mm.
It's really hard
Yeah.
to write minimalistic.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I've done. It's 25,000 words. It's 10 chapters. The best compliment I've gotten from I hand it out to readers. I say, tell me what you think. I got a WhatsApp from a person, and they said, do not say this to anyone. And I am violating it now because I'm not saying names. I'm sitting on the toilet. I have 5 minutes. Guess what? I've already learned something, and I can close it up because it's so short. And that's a great compliment.
Yes.
It is very pragmatic, it is very direct, but it doesn't lose the depth of research.
Mm.
Yeah. Everything is evidenced by what you are. It's like us sitting in the room. It's very conversational. And I think it is needed because it is clearing away that myth of toughness and resilience is hard, and it's nonsense. And the first chapter is about resilience is not a noun. Resilience is a verb.
Mm.
Cannot switch it on. We have to learn it. We have to do it. We're going to fail. We're going to fall on our nose. And then we have to get up and we do it again. It's about the softness of the bamboo, not the hardness of concrete.
Well, I really appreciate that because I like to read. I've got a ton of books back here. You obviously have read a lot too. And I think when you write a book, the question is, who are you writing it for? And when I write, I don't write for academics. I
Yep.
want to write for the every person. I want to do exactly what you have done, to the point, learn something. And do we need a whole 25-page chapter to learn the one thing? Well, I guess it depends on like, who your audience is. But if your audience is most people, and even those practitioners need that,
Yep.
summed up so that it's clear and the message doesn't get lost by all the other sort of clutter that can accumulate. And so I really appreciate that style of writing. I'm very much looking forward to it. I was reading about the book, and there's a line
Yeah.
about it that I just really see this in so many people who are working, and this idea of quietly unraveling but still showing up. I just see
Yeah.
that in so many people. They're just quietly falling apart, but they're
Yeah.
still showing up. What do you say to those people?
Um, the reason why I pause is because that's part of my life story also.
Mm.
I've quietly unraveled and still showed up. And what this experience taught me is we need to be careful not to be totally unraveled and then
Mm.
showing up so that we break. That's concrete.
Mm.
But is to masterfully unravel and masterfully holding functioning.
Mm.
So when you are having a difficult, let me just fabulate an example. If you have a difficult family situation, right? Let's say you go through a very difficult toxic breakup. And many people then might think, okay, I'm withdrawing, I need a break, I can't go to work, and so on. But work might be the place where you actually feel safe. Of course, the toxic breakup is going to use so much charge. It zaps the vitality out of you.
Mhm.
the workplace will not be able to replenish that. Of course, work is, I mean, we all know how busy work is, right? And it gives you a whole system. And what I mean with system is your heart, is your soul, and allow me to speak of the soul, is your mind, is your body, gives your whole system the understanding the world is not just unraveling. There are spaces which are safe, in which I can be habitual rather than consistently vigilant. Yeah. So this is, we need to show up in order to access these spaces whilst life is unraveling. So to me, this is the flexibility in which we will find ourselves if we want to become resilient. Because what resilience is, if you think about where the idea comes from, it comes from the material science, where they used to clamp the metal between two hands, or still do, and then they stress the metal, so they put pressure on the metal. Then the metal, of course, yields, or it breaks, but it yields. And resilience is the coming back. So if you think about the process, in order to engage with resilience, life needs to pressure you, correct? The pressure must be so heavy that you can't hold it any longer. The moment you yield, this is when you engage in resilience. And then, once the pressure and the yielding comes to that threshold, and you are building your way back up, this is developing resilience. So if somebody has never had pressure in their life which made them yield, and they tell me about how resilient they are, I must tell them, oh, let me just do a thing here. Darling, you have no idea what you're talking about. Because life has never given them the opportunity to learn how this resilience thing works. Yeah. And if you do not yield, and that's for me so important, what the people understand, you break. We don't want you to break. So the yielding, the coming home and they saying, I'm done, I'm spent, oh my goodness, I need to do something, right? That's what we often say is not good enough because we should be harder and tougher and, pushing it off and all of that nonsense. That takes you to crashing, breaking, concrete. Whereas the yielding allows you to notice something has pressured me so much that it has thrown me out of my normal state of being, and I have to rebuild. So this is the unraveling, but the noticing, that's the showing up.
Gosh, that's a lot to think about. That
I'm
is
sorry.
no, that's wonderful. I'm looking at the time and I have a lot of questions that I want to continue on this line, but I think we'll just have to end there. But I do have this last question I ask all of my guests.
Yeah.
As you look into the future of work, what do you think needs to happen so that not only will all workers be treated with dignity and respect, but that people will be encouraged to thrive and flourish?
Genuineness and transparency. Genuineness implies that I am not coming from a hidden agenda. And transparency allows me to see that. And I believe many workplaces are suffering from a lack of trust.
Yeah.
And if I do not trust, my system is on consistent alert. And in such a space of alertness, finding the bravery and the courage to say something is extremely difficult, especially when you need your next paycheck.
Right.
Look, I'm not riding on cloud 9 or 7 or whatever.
Right.
I'm very down to earth. So I think genuineness, transparency is something companies who are truly invested in working with people need it. They need to build this because that fosters trust.
Unfortunately, I think you're right, because those are two hard asks. I mean, the genuine is against the grain of playing the game, and the transparency is every place I go, there is a lack of transparency. I mean, this is one of the roots of the conflicts at work. People don't know. They don't know what they don't know. They know they don't know stuff. It's this lack of communication. But I mean, if people, and we have this radar for when people are not, people are not being transparent and when they're not being genuine.
Yeah.
It's a tall order, but I believe it's the truth nonetheless.
Yeah. Genuineness and transparency doesn't mean everyone needs to know everything.
Right.
That's not what I mean, right?
Right, of course not.
But it means also that I'm able to say, as somebody who calls themselves leaders, and many leaders are not leaders, they're maybe managers, right? So I mean, I don't want to say managers are bad, just to be very clear. It's a very different work.
Right.
And it's a very different task, and it's a very different person who does these jobs. I need to be able to stand up. You're not getting this piece of information, and this is the reason why. That's also genuine, and
Yeah.
it's also transparent,
Yes.
right? So
And
this is
adults,
not,
yeah, adults can handle that. I mean,
of course,
we can't let you know this because X. Oh, okay. Right.
of course,
Or this is what's going on and there's these other things, but at this time we can't disclose. Oh, okay.
yeah,
And the more you do that and the more you see the follow through and
yeah,
yeah, this is reasonable. Most people don't think they should be able to know everything depending on where they are in an organization. It's not proper and you know,
yeah.
oh, well, oh, goodness, I could just talk on and on with you. Thank you so much for your time and being on
Thank
Conflict
you.
Managed. I so enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Ute, thank you so much for being on Conflict Managed. What an absolute joy you are to talk with. You've got so much wisdom and insight. I really appreciate all that you shared with us. Conflict Managed is produced by third-party workplace conflict restoration services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. If you want to watch this conversation with Ute and I, you can go out to YouTube. It's at 3P Conflict Restoration. Come back. We have new episodes every Tuesday, and it would be a great favor if you could like or follow, subscribe wherever you listen or watch this podcast. If you haven't had a chance to check out my latest book, How to Be Unprofessional at Work, Tips to Ensure Failure, it's 80 tips of what not to do at work and considers what to do instead to have a healthy work environment. And I have the same sort of writing style, it sounds, as Ute, where I'm very to the point, 80 short chapters about what not to do and thinking about what to do instead. Our music is courtesy of Duff Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.